Yeah, honey, I think we're good. I'm looking
Yeah.
out on this beautiful tree and the sky and your
Yeah.
face. It's
I love
good.
it.
So
Well, I'm
good.
so glad to be here with you. It's actually a rainy day in Los Angeles. I'm all cozy, and it's the perfect day to talk about love. And that is what I associate with you the most. So I want to devote our time today to love. And I want you to share your lessons and your journey in love. And I want to share with my community that they already know this, and you probably already know this too from following my work. But I really believe that is the whole point, is to learn how to give and receive love. I think love is why we're here. I think love is the reason we're still here, even with all of our discord, even with all of the violence and the terrible things that happen. If love wasn't the biggest thing, if it wasn't the most important thing, we wouldn't still be here. And so, knowing that that's my framework, I could say, I could make the argument everyone's life is about love. But when I think about you and your life and your work and meeting you 17 years ago that we were just laughing about, knowing you all these years and tracking you, you really have devoted your personal and professional life to love. So I want to start with where that all started, the origin stories. What were your first lessons about love? As a little girl, did you learn that kind of approach to life from your family of origin, from your parents? Or is that something over time that you have delved into? And if so, I'm curious about what the pull was, what the tug to love was.
Such a beautiful question. Well, first of all, let me just back up and say thank you
Yeah.
to you, Paige, because the feeling is mutual. And to have someone come to you and say, I think your life's been about love and you emanate love, it's like, that's pretty much the highest
Mm.
compliment ever. Because the truth is, I agree with you that we are all made of love, even if it didn't seem
Yeah.
that way or feel that
Yeah.
way. I do believe that we are. And that at the end of the day, I could not agree more that at the end of this journey in this body, in
Yeah.
this lifetime, if we can say, I loved well and was loved beautifully, that's even if it's one
Yes.
person or one love or a
Yes.
lot, that's everything. And it's never too late to get there. And so that line, which I love about like, well, actually, it's sort of like when we veer off of that knowing,
Yeah.
what would love
Yes.
say?
Yes.
What would love say? We don't even have to associate it to a person or what we heard because a lot of people didn't
Yeah.
hear it. But if we can imagine the energy and the frequency of love, what would it say?
Yeah.
What would it do? What would
Yeah.
love do? So thank
I'm
you
so
so
glad you're
much.
here. I
It's
agree. I
like my,
agree.
me
Yes.
too.
To all of that.
Yeah, and it's my favorite topic. How could it not be?
Yeah.
And you're one of my favorite people. So I'm just thrilled to be with you as well. In terms of your
Yeah.
question about where did this access, for me personally, come from? I mean, there's that whole sort of talk about nature
Yes.
or nurture. And so if I think back to my own life experience when I was young, the nature part was that I was born
Yes.
very sensitive. So we found a cassette tape. Yes, now you know
Yeah.
how old I am. Cassette tape,
Yeah.
everybody. Like, oh my God, I was probably in my 20s when I found this, at my parents' home, and I played it. And I was the baby of many, many
Okay.
years. So I came in when I had a sister that was 10, 12, and a brother that was
Okay.
14. So I found this cassette where we were all interviewed. My father was playing and just
Yeah.
saying, okay,
Oh, I
interviewing
love that.
everyone. And my 17-year-old sister, who was like pretending like she was a DJ,
Yeah.
but like riffing on everybody and saying, I'm going to college and I will be so happy to, leave my sister, this 15-year-old sister. She's such an immature little brat. I remember this line so well. But I'll miss my little sister Marcy so
Yeah.
much. No, okay. She's
Yeah.
playing. 5 minutes later, I get on as a
Yeah.
5-year-old and I say, because I don't know the difference between joking around and it being serious. So I was like, I don't like it when this sister's mean to this sister. She'll feel upset.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing that going, oh my God, like my sort of innate essence as sort of a
Yes.
sensitive being and kind of harmonizer. I just wanted everyone to love each
Yeah.
other. And when there was strife or when there was discord and people were fighting, I just didn't
Yes.
understand.
I can totally
I didn't
relate to
disconnect
that.
from it.
Yes.
You
Yes. I
can?
have this closet. My listeners and people who have worked with me online know that this closet behind me is full of journals because I reference it a lot in my writing. And If I'm online, I'm often in this position. And there's like 100 journals in there from when I was a child. And the earliest evidence of just being so curious about love, so sensitive to people not getting along. I mean, really young, like what you're describing, and wanting people to get along and feeling so confused and perplexed why there's war. I mean, like real big thoughts, real young. And as a former teacher and just tuned into people like you are, you can see this in children. When you work with children, you do see people who are, specifically tuned in and empathic in that way.
Yes. I have a friend who has two kids, and one kid had a hard time with empathy.
Yeah.
So they were focusing a lot on, like, imagine what that would feel like and the golden rule. And the other kid, she'd look at a kid crying and she'd cry.
Yeah.
I mean, she couldn't separate herself. So they were working on the sort of the boundaries of having compassion, but not
Yeah.
internalizing it. And so, yeah, we do come in with a constitution. So that's
Yeah.
part of it, I think. And in terms of the nurture part, I was really blessed.
Yeah.
I just was. Again, I was the baby. I was sort of cradled in love. And sometimes I feel like I got the best piece of the pie because when my parents had
Yeah.
babies early, they were
Yes.
babies themselves,
Yeah.
literally. I mean, and in those days, they didn't have parent education and parent. So by the time I came around, they were a bit older, a bit wiser. And so I received a lot of effusive
Yeah.
expressions of love. There was a lot of tactile touch. There was a lot of words. There was a lot of play.
Yes.
My mom was very tactile. My father was very playful. So, and plus I was very loved by my
Sure.
siblings because in those days, there wasn't like sibling rivalry stuff. I was the baby. So
Yeah.
everybody was loving on the baby. So I really was really fortunate. And so when I turned 50, I had, oh, Paige, I wish you were in that world. But it was really great. But I was in
Yeah.
LA and there were like, I think 50 women. I mean, it was like, and someone's like, how do you have this level of connection with this many people? And I said out loud something like 90% credit to my folks.
Yes.
And so the people, I have to tell you, I'm in such awe. I'll wrap with this part of this question, which is that I'm in such awe of my clients and my friends and the people I know I've been able to cross paths with that did not receive this kind of hands-on holding literally and figuratively, because when we talk about self-made humans, and so when they didn't receive that sort of early download of palpable expressed love, I'm in such awe of it. I'm so inspired by it. And it just shows us though that we're wired to love. As humans, we're wired. We lose our way because then fight or flight and sort of protection comes up when we get wounded, but we can always rewire and return to that. Always.
I think about that so much with my parents because I say to them, in terms of reflecting about my own parenting, now I have 3 teenagers in the home. I feel really good about my ability to parent and my ability to show love and talk about love and teach love in my nuclear family. But when I think about what they did, because their models of love were not as strong as they modeled love for me. So my mom had a neglectful mom.
Yes.
My dad's dad was hard on him. They both had influences. My mom's father was loving and my dad's mother. So they had different messages from the mom and the dad, my grandparents. But both of them are exponentially, I think, more skilled at communicating love and teaching love than was modeled to them. And so I think in this part of my life, as I'm in the middle of my life and now they're older, that my dad's 80 and my mom is 79, I'm so sure to communicate that to them. Like when they tell me I'm a good parent, I'm like, I'll take it. Thank you. Everybody loves to get validated for their parenting efforts because it's a full-time, relentless kind of position that you're in. But then I say back to them, but what they did and how much more loving they were, I think is remarkable. So I really relate to that. I have more and more compassion for people who did not have the loving caregivers that I had.
Yeah, that's right. And then, of course, if they choose to sort of stay awake to that and really directly put attention toward their own healing of that. And then if they, there's the healing process and then there's the awakening process. And the awakening takes you to a whole nother level of appreciation when you did not receive it, which is not easy, but boy, when people get there and they just simply accept what was
Yes.
and what is, and they realize that part of who I am today is part of the fabric, and they're very mindful of what they want to emulate and what they don't, and how they want to change an
Yeah.
intergenerational pattern, right?
Powerful.
That's
Yeah.
epic. Oh my gosh,
Did
yes,
you
for
know
sure.
that you were going to be along this path of the healing arts, psychotherapy, helping people? Did you know that early on because you were so naturally tuned into people's pain and love and empathizing?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
It's not like I knew I'm going to be a therapist, or I'm going to be in the mental health well-being field. But when you look back,
Yeah.
it
All
all
the
makes
seeds were
sense,
there.
right? I
Yeah.
had, oh, for sure, kids, friends coming to
Yeah.
me and trusting me. And my parents, literally, I would, my parents had a 74 epic love affair,
So
year
cool.
love affair, but
Yeah.
it went through its twists and turns, and pretty much on my time because they
Yeah.
went through their stuff when I was 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. And I would literally be 12 and take my mom in one room,
Yeah.
talk to her, take my dad in the other room, talk to him, bring them
Yeah.
together. And it wasn't until I was in my late 20s, Paige, that I was in my master's program. You had to do counseling with one of the adjunct, whatever. And she said, "Do you know how inappropriate that was?" But at the time, I was like, well, I'm glad that, it can be
Yeah.
helpful. But the truth is, it wasn't really.
Yeah.
But many people in the help and healing field have history, and just again because it's part of our constitution,
Yes.
just being that out in the world from the time we're
Yeah.
little, and wanting people to feel better when they're
Yes.
hurting, and wanting to
So when you
for
were in your
sure.
late
Yep.
20s, was it an obvious choice to pursue that kind of graduate work? Or did you have an aha moment or
No.
you
Yeah. Okay. So look, when those times in life where you're just are presented with a person, place, opportunity, and it's just an automatic,
Yeah.
I'm doing that. I literally didn't see it coming. I had a pretty incredible career in television, media sales in my
Yeah.
20s. And I had a roommate in Chicago who came through, like, just to meet to see if we wanted to room together. And I'm like, "What are you up to?" And she said, "I'm getting a 2-year degree and getting my master's in clinical social work." I'm like, "What's that?" All I knew was like a PhD option. And I wasn't interested in going back to school all those years at that point. I said, "What's that?" And she goes, "Oh, yeah, this university, 2 years, and then you do this." Done. I was literally in my manager's
Yeah.
office the next day and saying, "I really
That
want
is
to go to
so
school on the
cool.
side." And he said, "Okay." But I never thought that I don't think he ever thought I would
Right.
pursue it. And of course, I did go back for a doctorate, but that's just because I loved what I was doing and studying and wanted to learn more. But yeah, you have those moments that when things are in alignment, when people, places, things,
Yeah.
opportunities are in alignment, there's an automatic yes,
Yeah.
right? Even, and oftentimes we don't see
Right.
it coming. We don't,
Absolutely.
yeah.
How did you
Hmm.
move into that
Hmm.
holistic space? Because when I first met you with First Tuesday Global years ago, that was something that you
Yeah.
really opened my eyes to, is this intersection of psychology and spirituality. So where I was coming from was more traditional psychology. I thought, oh, if I became a therapist, it would just be diagnosing. And, I had a kind of a narrow view of that profession. But I was always interested
Hmm.
in psychology and helping. I just couldn't see where I could fit into it. And being a part of that group and having access to the speakers that you would bring in, and you were
Yeah.
really standing with a flag, I felt like, at that crossroads of psychology and spirituality
Mm.
in a way that I hadn't seen before, and
Mm.
in a way that I feel like is now way more
Mm.
common to see. And so
Yeah.
did that come from the conversations that you had with clients where you were starting to realize? Because traditionally, psychotherapy isn't about love. It's hard to study love. I think as we've gotten into positive psychology and understanding thriving and well-being, we're now talking about it. But
Yeah.
20, 30 years ago, love wasn't
Yeah.
really, that wasn't celebrated in the therapy world as something to study or quantify.
Yeah. First of all, it's so cool to hear you say this, because when we're busy being ourselves and we're
Yeah.
just kind of doing what we do and naturally drawn to what we're drawn to and to share, we don't even know how it's landing for people.
Yeah.
I didn't realize the events that I was producing and the people that were speaking at those events had an impact on your psychology at the time of going, "Oh,
Yeah.
I really?" And that all of this was being integrated. Look, I remember I went to Northwestern, and freshman year,
Yeah.
so I'm 17 because I went to
Okay.
college young, 17, and I learned about, do you know who Leo Biscaglia
I know the
is?
name, but I don't know the work.
So Leo Biscaglia was a professor at the University of Southern California teaching Love 1A.
Maybe that's why it's
Okay.
in the back of
And
my mind name, because I was always tuned into people who were having this conversation that you really started having.
well, so was I. So I'm like blown away by this man. And I used to fantasize, gosh, what if from kindergarten on, children were
Yeah.
taught about how to love, how to communicate, how to love themselves, how to have courageous conversations, all these kinds of things. What if kids were taught at that young age, right? And here's this man teaching in college. And by the way, of course, it had a wait list.
Yeah.
So people might have been saying, I'm sending my kid to college and they're taking a class called Love 1A. The man made his mark. He was such a beautiful being. And he wrote a book called Just Love,
Yeah.
the classic, and other books. And I would literally bring my friends in from the hallway going, listen to this. And he'd be on TV. I mean, listen to what he's talking about. So I was drawn to that kind of content. Fast forward, when I was doing my training,
Yeah.
I remember being at an agency and I don't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
I was just instinctively doing whatever. I wasn't trying to follow notes. And I went to, and the supervisor was a lovely woman, but she was very kind of rigid and kind of stoic. Okay. And I'm telling her, you know, you have to tell her exactly what's happening in the room and what he said, she said, and what you said and what happened. And she's like, how do you know this? And I'm like, know what? And she's like, well, how did you know she thought I was going to be talking about some book or whatever. This goes back to Constitution, who we are and how we show up and express ourselves in the world. And so I said, I don't know.
It's natural.
I just did.
Yeah.
And so it's natural. And that's when we know we're doing what we're meant to do. But then when I went back for a doctorate.
How long had you been in practice?
I went back for a doctorate. Oh man, I think I was, how I know this, I think about boyfriends. Who was the boyfriend at the time? Who was the boyfriend at my doctoral
memorable
dissertation
you're
party?
remembering them. So
Yeah,
they taught you about love.
100%. Okay, definitely. Yeah, we'll get to that maybe. That's a whole retreat conversation. Okay, so I would say I was around 30.
Okay, so you had been in practice,
that, which is
you had enough touch points.
I'd been in practice for a few years. Yeah, I did. But oh gosh, I will share this with you too. I'm just getting flashes as you're asking me this. When my first job out of my master's program was working at a community mental health clinic, working with the chronically mentally ill, that's what they called them. And the criteria is that you had to have been psychiatrically hospitalized at least one night. Well, guess what? I learned so much about love on that during those years. I ended up making almost zero money, being there for 5 years because it was such a rich experience. But these people, Paige, I remember one woman was referred to me. She said, well, she won't be able to tolerate more than 5 minutes. She's paranoid, schizophrenic with body dysmorphic disorder. She thinks she looks like a monster. All this kind of stuff. It's huge trauma. Fast forward, we worked together for 4.5 years. That woman was in my office every week for 45 minutes. And guess what? When I left, you know, I was holding it together, but she was one person. When I said goodbye, and I was tearful. And she goes, is it me? Is it me? Like she thought it was something she was wrong. I was like, no. I said, I'm going to miss you. I so cherish our time together. And she gives me this card and this gift. And she walks down the hall and she looks back. And I'm a mess. By this point, I am just drenched. I open the gift and I forgot the musician's name. She's a French woman. And it's a CD of love songs.
Oh, wow. Beautiful.
They're all love songs. Okay. Because that's what
that
it
was. The energy.
We
that
had
was
that
the exchange.
Together.
Yeah. And it's so healing. Yeah. It's what really ultimately heals anybody, anytime, for any reason. It's always love. It's just hard to talk about it. And I think we're getting it better. I think we are moving towards getting more explicit about it and teaching it. But it's really an energy. I find that it's an energy. And if you can come open-hearted, people feel it, people heal from it, and it's the most important thing.
Yes, for sure. I mean, when you talk about energy, when I was in my doctoral program, my first inclination was to do a dissertation topic on the experience of spirituality and mental
Yeah.
health. Like they looked at me like I had
Right. And by the way, now you'd get approved, and that's all we want to study right now.
approved. It would be like, yeah, what's
Yeah.
new? Like now it's kind of like, now it's totally mainstream. Exactly. So I changed my dissertation to the experience of never married women between the ages of 29 and 39 that desire marriage and children, which was a wonderful sort of pursuit as well. But then I come to LA in 2005, and I felt like everyone's speaking my language, is speaking my heart
Yeah.
language, really. And I felt very at home. I did in Chicago too, but LA was a whole nother level. And of course, time and evolution. And then, yeah, this is now, I mean, the School of Spiritual Psychology in Santa Monica. I was like, wait,
Yeah.
what? I would have gone there
Yeah.
instead of getting a PhD, I think, if I had
Yeah.
I known. So I don't even remember what the question was, but
Yeah.
bottom line is, yes.
Well, we were talking about
remind
your
me, where
clients,
are we?
but now I'm interested because you come to LA in 2005. You have your PhD, you've had this private practice. I want to understand about how you have felt love through community and building community, because that's when I met you, was 2005. So you must have just started First Tuesday Global, or maybe 2006, because I was new to LA, and I felt a deep sense of love in that community, and just the way that you would open up and make every speaker feel like the best thing ever, just very present. That's what I felt from you leading us, is your presence and your intention, and how authentic you were in starting and leading us in that conversation, which, like to my point earlier, really impacted me. It impacted my career path. It impacted my just engagement with this topic that I love so much, because no one had been talking about it in the way that I felt like you were talking about it then.
Oh, I'm so glad, Paige. That's just beautiful. This is an example of when we love, or when
Yeah.
we have some even random act of kindness out there in the world. We never know where it's going to land and how
Yeah.
people are going to remember and how it's going to impact us. Our commitment to ourselves is just to show up as we are. And when we do, your question about community, I didn't think of it. Like, just like
Yeah.
I didn't think of it as, oh, I'm going to create a community. That was never, it was not even, again, not
Yeah.
even on my radar. It was coming naturally. I just brought women together in Chicago in living rooms. My mother would say, can you take $5 at the door? I'd be like, no, it's not about the money. And it was just because I love to do it outside of my social life with good friends, outside of my office time with clients. I just thought it would be great. This is literally when the internet was
Yeah.
starting to boom. So I was literally by hand sending emails. You sent me an email. Hey, does anyone know a plumber? I'm sending it out to the group. Does anyone know a plumber from
Yeah.
Paige? It was that basic. It was that grassroots, organic. Okay. So then when I moved to LA, someone who had been a part of it in Chicago said, hey, can you start a First Tuesday here? And I was like, well, I don't know. I put out when I moved, I'm like, who knows fabulous
Yeah.
people in an email to a bunch of people. And 3 of my dearest friends in LA came from that friend of
Yeah.
a friend of somebody who opened their doors and hearts to me, and we became dear friends. And so we said, okay, invite a friend. We have 20 women in a room. That's how it started in the
Yeah.
Valley in LA, someone's house. Fast forward, I had to monetize everything because I didn't initially recognize my doctorate in the state of California, even though it was an accredited institution. So I had to so everyone's like, listen, you really should monetize this. You're putting a lot of heart and time into it. So then we had a membership, and then it morphed into big name speakers and influencers coming and wanting to have more visibility. So that's how it happened. Now, that said, sort of the idea of the archetype. So we all have our archetypal things that run through us that are very integral and very visceral and very primal to our nature. One of mine is connector.
Yeah.
It just is. There's so much I don't know how to do, and I feel like they're speaking French, and I'm like, I feel like
Me too.
I'm in a foreign
Like
land,
Excel.
right? Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh,
Yeah,
spatial
you
stuff.
and I are
then
never going to partner on a project that requires Excel without a third person.
That's right. Right. Hey, we might not be the yin to our yang, because we might be like
Yeah.
yang and yang and yin and yang. We'll just add on to the team and fill in where we needed. But anyway, I love it. I don't think I love anything more than introducing something I love to someone else, or someone I love to somebody else, and then they love each other, and then it expands, right? So
Have you leaned on that community through your own personal hard times and your personal hardships?
that's a great question. I wasn't aware of that consciously. And then a couple times, one was when I launched a nonprofit. I wanted children. I wasn't able to have children. There was this kind of silent grief that was going on. And I was noticing it with clients and friends. And then I was like, well, wow, there's this private pain going on for women who wanted children, and destiny did not direct them in that direction, right? And then there's 153 million orphans in the world that are looking for love. And so I launched this nonprofit. And when I announced it, actually, I announced it, I think you know Dr. Sue Morter. It was the first time she came. I usually had 20-minute like breakout times where people can connect at the events. And this time I'm like, you guys, I'm going to be taking up the space tonight on this one. It was about harvesting and manifesting in the fall. And I showed this video, and I was so nervous that like my community would feel, and they all stood up and they were like, yes, we're with you. And I remember feeling so moved. And then the other time is when I decided to end my last marriage. And we had this kind of like these really beautiful fireside chats where we would have like Sunday brunches on a quarterly basis. And they were very intimate. It was my favorite thing. And I just showed up to one of them. I tried to go to all of them, but someone else would host. And I just kind of burst into tears. It was like I was going through the tunnel and I was emotional. I was like, well, this is where I'm at and this is where I'm going. I'm not worried about the future, but it's like dark night of the soul times. And they showed up for you. It was really beautiful. For sure. And so, yes, I mean, listen, you cannot be a parent that doesn't, I just heard a story of, a parent that's going through midlife stuff, and the teenage girl is now coming of age. They're both coming of age, but it's the first time in her life that her mother needs her. Okay. So what goes around comes around. And now she's holding space for her mom, who's been doing the same for her whole life. And I felt that way in community for sure.
It's so beautiful. What do you feel like that experience of the nonprofit connecting the children, did that illuminate you even further about the universal love? You and I have talked about love with a little L and then love with a capital L, this energy of love. To me, when you describe that, and I was a part of that, I remember you announcing that and getting more involved in that. It seems to me like an even elevated curiosity or expression or experience of love than just the boyfriends. Like just understanding what it's all about. Is that how you felt like you engaged with it? Did it teach you love's wisdom in a different way?
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, look, when I think about love, I think it's almost like the circular motion, all these different circles of its expression.
Yeah, it's a great way to say it.
There's so many different ways it expresses itself.
Yes, and it's not necessarily like a ladder. It's more, I like that you used a circle. Yes, that makes sense to me.
Yeah. And so I remember going to Peru, and we connected with this group, Home for Orphan and Abandoned Kids. And I'm driving my car, I'm listening to the Spanish, CDs, trying to learn this language. I'm so badly wanting, my girlfriend sends me a bunch of CDs. I get there, and the first night, it's gone. Like every Spanish word in my brain was just mush. I'm like, oh, please, can you translate this? Anyway, 2 weeks later, I'm in love with these children, and there's this love connection, and it had nothing to do with language. Nothing. It was all conveyed through eyes and expression and touch and intention. I mean, I'm not going to lie. It was frustrating not being able to talk to them and go deeper in that way. But honestly, it wasn't necessary for that bond to happen, and those kids will always be in my heart, honestly. And then listen, First Tuesday, it might've been before, I don't know if it was, we were doing this. It might've been before you showed up, Paige, to the community. We had First Tuesday Circle of Giving, where we had these home makeovers. We'd find these families in the community. And once a year, we would do these massive home makeovers that were just extraordinary. And that was very humbling. I mean, to this day, I was talking to Michael, my fiance, Michael Love, that's in my life now. And just the other night about how I wasn't great at keeping in touch with everyone. It's just life has so much. But one of the moms is like, you're my angel. I'm like, you're my angel, because I can't get over her. I cannot get over her with almost such little resources. The love this woman holds in her heart for her 5 kids what she wasn't able to endure takes my breath away, really.
So as
Yeah.
you're exploring that expression of love, what's happening in your romantic life at the time? Like, were you fulfilled by these pursuits, or were you still feeling like, I don't know the timeline of if you were married at that time or if you were still single?
Which time? Which one are we talking about? The time?
As you're talking about launching the nonprofit with Sea Mamas, yeah, and you're got a thriving community around you, where
Yeah.
does the
Yeah.
romantic
So,
love fit into? And the reason I'm asking is because there's always people in my community who are either going through a divorce or maybe haven't been married yet that are really wrestling with this idea of having a personal experience of romantic love and that intimacy with one other partner versus accessing like universal love. Because you know how when you're searching for romantic love and someone says, well, just believe in love, love is everywhere. And you're like, no, I really want a partner. You know, like you'll hear that from clients or conversate or friends. And so I'm wondering for you personally, where along this spectrum of fulfillment in terms of this expression that you talk about that's broader and beyond borders and beyond language. But for you romantically, that expression of love, when did that come about in your life and how have you experienced that part of your life?
oh man, that's also a retreat together. Let's do it, Paige. Listen, I did not have a life of the traditional trajectory that most people
Yeah.
expect or are told to expect or are told to follow or want in their heart, which is, this age. And then I knew I was a heterosexual
Yeah.
being. So I was like, okay, I'm going to get married to a boy and man, and then I'm going to
Yeah.
have kids. And then and my life did not go that way. I had 6 love affairs, I would say, from the time it was like
Yeah.
puppy love, but that was real
Sure.
too,
Oh,
I will
yeah.
say. Oh my gosh, pure, pure. 6 loves before I met my love, Michael. And it's interesting when you talk about, first of all, your question for the women that are listening, this whole idea of, I want a partner and yes, I want to always access universal. It's not
Yeah.
either, it's both. Because the truth is, I really do believe most people, like what you were saying in the beginning of our discussion today, we want to love and be loved. And one of the expressions of love, just one, is
Yeah.
romantic love. And even people that are defended against it, deep
Yeah.
down, all the layers, most people, I think we're wired to have
Yeah.
intimacy, emotional, physical, sexual. It's
Yeah.
just, we're wired that way. And so there's a lot of loneliness
Yes.
going on, particularly now in the world. Yeah, it's gotten really more intense. Of course, it's always been there, but the
Yeah.
pandemic and then this, but I think people are feeling their, at times, isolation
Yeah.
more than ever. So I will say that there's a thing in psychology called
Hmm.
sublimation, where you transfer a pain point into something productive and
Hmm.
positive. And my first husband, Henry, I credit him for my PhD because I
Yeah.
called it my intellectual
Yeah.
distraction. If we were happy and I was in my late 20s, early 30s, I would have been having babies and we would have been
Yeah.
fixing up a sweet home and that would have been that. But threw myself into a doctoral program.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't have time. And that's why I didn't make the decision of that marriage for 5 years as opposed to 1 year when it was super
Yeah.
clear for me. Henry and I are very dear friends to this
Mm.
day. So, but back then, thank you, Henry, for my PhD. And then in my Los Angeles days, I wasn't able to get pregnant, so I had that
Yeah.
going on. My marriage was a really sweet marriage with a beautiful man, and we had real
Yeah.
love between us, but it was not going in the direction I needed it to go to have a strong enough foundation for partnership, for
Yes.
lifetime
Yeah.
partnership. And so that level of heartbreak, little by little, that was going on when First Tuesday was blowing up and See Mama was born, that was going on in the background, both of those
Yeah.
things. So
Yeah.
sublimation, we take some of that love that we want to experience and we just go, okay, where can it be
Yeah.
expressed? And again, I wasn't
Right.
conscious of that, by the
Right.
way, at the
Do
time.
you think people ever can be conscious in the moment? Because I find that too. I find my understanding is always well after the fact and you've reflected. And for me, it's journaling, really thinking and journaling. Writing is my, way to understanding because you see people in real time struggling for understanding. I do too. It's hard to, as conscious as we want to believe we are because we've devoted our life to helping other people elevate their consciousness. I always wonder, like, could it have been any different? Or did you need, is that possible? I don't even know if you would have understood how it all hung together because you're just doing it. You're just getting through the pain and you're just getting through the positive parts too.
That's right. Sometimes we're just needing to get through it, to get over the
Yeah.
bridge, and then to have hindsight and reflective hindsight and say, wow, that's what I did with part of that pain. I had to go direct, and part of it got
Yeah.
transferred in this other direction in order to make the most of my life and keep going. I will share this. One of the moments that was very palpable for me, and this is about this. I think I've never thought about it
Yeah.
like this until this moment with you. But when I decided I needed to end. Basically, those 6
Mhm.
romances, I basically ended each
Yeah.
one. Not because I didn't try, not because I bailed. That's not who I am, but because and it's heartbreaking on the way
Yes.
down. It's heartbreaking. You're like, oh. And when I realized I needed to set myself free from my last marriage and move on while staying connected to him, we're still very
Yeah.
connected as well. When I was going through that dark night, because again, as something's breaking apart, we're grieving.
Yes.
We're grieving.
Absolutely.
Sometimes people are devastated. We can't see our
Yeah.
future yet. We can't see anything yet. It's black and then it's kind of just blank. And then you're like, where am I going? I thought I was going this direction. Where am I? It's hard. It's scary. It's painful. When I was going through but I was able to do it kind of in an
Yeah.
accelerated way because I think of all the personal work, but I was in it for that period of time. But the one thing, Paige, that gave me
Yeah.
palpable comfort, you won't even believe, was thinking about considering donating a kidney.
Really? How did that even
A
oh,
friend of
because a
mine
friend needed one?
no, I heard there was one man who had experienced it and he would always talk about it.
Yeah.
And then there's this woman that came with me on
Wow.
the group tour to
Yeah.
Peru, this lovely young
Yeah.
woman, by the way, 30s.
Yeah.
And she decides to just donate a kidney.
Wow.
And that came through. And I'm like, I need to do that. I want to do that. And then I'm telling some people close to my life, I'm going to donate a kidney. But the point is, it's the
Yeah.
thought of giving part of my body to someone else
Yeah.
in need, which is called love
Yeah.
in a different form, was the only thing that gave me
And
relief
strength.
when I was
Yes.
heartbroken
Yes.
over having to let go of a love over here. I was like, well, what if
Yeah.
I'm just sharing that as a moment in time now? So I just remember teaching me so much about the power of
Yeah.
giving, but even the idea of giving, which I didn't end up giving in that
Yeah.
way, but just the idea of giving, I received
Yeah.
something, even with just the
Yeah.
idea.
That's really
I
powerful.
mean,
It's so
yeah,
true. I have
I
had
know.
that experience with anxiety, so I'll help my clients with
Mhm,
anxiety. I haven't had a lot of personal experience with depression, but I really do understand anxiety personally. And I have
mhm.
had this experience for myself, but then I've also read about it that if you have anxiety in situations where you can help someone, for example, on an airplane, if you are anxious
Mm,
because you're on the airplane and you feel trapped, which is part of my certain makeup of anxiety is feeling trapped,
yeah.
I will look around the airplane and see who I can help. And I was doing that just naturally before
Yes.
I read about it. And then I've read that it's a very popular way that people can then tap their own competence. Because then you think, well, I have the power,
Yes.
which anxiety is the opposite of feeling powerful. It's feeling powerless. And
Right.
I just think that's what you're
Right.
saying too. It's like moving that point of focus to
Yes.
where can I give? Where can I,
That's right.
actively engage love?
Give love.
Yes. Yes. It really
Yes.
helps.
And
Yeah.
engage is even a better word. It's a beautiful way to put it. It's like the Maya Angelou comment when she said so beautifully, she has so many jewels, but when she said, giving liberates the soul of the
Yeah.
giver. And that's right. That giving is one of the languages of
Yeah.
love. And receiving is one of the languages of
Yeah.
love, right? It goes both ways. Sometimes as women, we forget about the receiving piece. But boy, when we get to
Yeah.
that, then we're at a whole new level of
Yeah. I
understanding.
still have to work on that a
Sonia
lot. I'm
Cho,
sure people listening have to work on that a lot, receiving. I think that's another podcast. Just that.
well, yeah, but let me speak this
Yeah.
out loud because I thought it was so beautiful. Another moment in time that I was struck. I was hearing Sonia Choquette speak at a bookstore in
Yeah.
Chicago many years ago, and she was talking about the chakras in the body, and the fourth chakra is love, the capacity for us to love and be loved, for us to open our heart, to give love and receive love and express love. And she said, I'll never forget it. And because at that point, it was definitely not very
Yeah.
balanced between what I was giving and what I was asking for, open to, receptive to, receiving. And she said, when you can receive what you give is when you really know what love is all about.
It's beautiful.
And I remember it hitting me like a 2x4. I was like, oh, okay. And I remember writing it down, like, okay, I have to remember that for life. Because it's true. When and how many times does somebody try to help us? We're like, no, we got it. I'm good. Or we don't want to let somebody know that we also have needs, and we also have dependency needs, and we also have reliance needs, and we also could use a helping hand. Oh boy. But when we allow our hearts that's why with clients, honestly, Paige, and maybe I'm sure you felt this way too with everyone that you've worked with. I'm so also in awe and inspired all the time with the beauty of a vulnerable heart, which is really just an open heart, that a capacity just to be open and say, I am here to receive support and invest in myself. I mean, talk about elevated. That's big stuff. Even when someone's suffering, that's,
I have a file on my computer of what clients say, because I feel like everyone is so intelligent when they're in their heart space, when they're sharing, when they're centered and their intention is to share about their inner life to feel better. They've shown up that way. They've decided to do that. It's so incredible what comes out of people's mouths. Really.
I love that you are doing that, because honestly, you can't imagine how many times I've thought, damn, if I wrote notes from the time I've been in practice for 30 years, there would be definitely a New York Times bestseller, because it's part of the human experience. Everyone would be able to relate. I love that you're doing that, and you've been doing that. And you're so right. You listen, if we sit back and listen and we're like, whoa, back to the community mental health clinic, when the stuff that would come out, and I'd be like, okay, fine line between insanity and beyond wisdom. Wow.
And I think this idea that we have to go out to get guidance. Now, you and I both work as guides, so I really do think there's a value in that. And I love my profession, and I'm so happy to be in this healing arts field. But there's so much wisdom within. Truly, we have our inner counselor. We have an inner wise one, that when we're centered and we are intentional and quiet and still about it, you do have the answers on the inside. I think it's just sometimes we need support to reach for them and to feel safe enough and trusting enough to hear those words and say, okay, I'm actually going to live by my own values, my own words. Because, I'm sure you've had this moment. I know I've had this moment where you wake up and you're like, whose life am I living? Like, what am I doing right now? I have those less and less as I get older and more conscious, but I certainly had those when I was younger.
Yeah.
I want to connect your sharing about receiving to Michael now, your big love of your life now. Do you think that part of your fulfillment and just the way that you feel so expanded in this current relationship has to do with your ability to receive?
Oh, 100%. Like when women are approaching 40 and 50, I'm like, congratulations, you're in for. Ultimately, we all want to feel free, right? We all want to feel free to be who we are and be connected to the truth of who we are, and to be comfortable in our skin, to trust that voice and those instincts and the intuition for that, to trust the inner guide that you're talking about. And I think that the older we get, as I'm talking about women, if we're paying attention and we're committed to our own personal growth, the more we get to the truth of who we are, and the more we are not willing to betray ourselves anymore. And so, yes, we can look back, and I can look back in my chapters with people, and I could say, I was very much Marcy. However, I think I held this part back. I don't think I was fully expressed here. I think I was either trying to protect that person or myself with sharing certain parts of me. When I had the space, and I took a couple of years when I was like, I just need to get back in my own consciousness juices, grounding. But when I met Michael in that year of dating, I was so unattached to any one date being anything. I say to women, just show up and just have an
Yeah.
experience. Just be who you are and just be like, and who are you? Like, just be
Yeah.
real. Like, you're not going to burn a bridge by being real. You have nothing to lose and everything to gain. And that's the only way you're going to find out who's truly aligned with your heart. So when Michael and these dating sites, I met
Yeah.
him on a dating site, you have this tiny paragraph of like 50
Yeah.
words to describe yourself, which is by the way, great exercise, everyone who's listening. If you were going to put in terms of really attuning to
Yeah.
the truth of who you are. So I put it, and in our early discussions, just on the phone, because we lived in a different state, he said, wow, you really want a lot in a man. I said, yeah, I do. And he said, good.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, okay, game's on. All right, I can talk to you again next week,
How
tomorrow,
cool.
5 minutes. So yeah, it's a long answer to your 100%. I didn't hold anything back. And then there's just so much stuff that we either haven't really investigated within our own desires
Yeah.
or vision, or that we have shame around or fear around. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to say what's on my mind and on my heart. And if he judges me or doesn't get it or doesn't want it, so be
Do
it.
you think that
I mean,
relationship,
we can all tolerate a moment of just,
was that
Mhm.
relationship with Michael the first time you feel like you had done that as wholeheartedly as you did with him? Like, did you take more risks?
So think about, we talk about the onion.
Yes.
Like, I mean, listen, all these people in my own life, the 6 loves that I
Yeah.
talked about, they know who I am.
Yeah.
I wasn't a complete imposter. I mean, they know who I am, the spirit of who I am. But I kept peeling
Yeah.
more and more the layers of my own life experience within myself. I allowed them to reveal themselves to myself, to experience them in a new way, to embrace them and to integrate them. A lot of times we'll split off the good and
Yeah.
bad, or the stuff that we're proud of, or the stuff that we judge. We all do
Mhm.
this. But the more I started, that's when I talk about holistic health. It is about having everything integrated,
Yeah.
right? So the more I did that for myself, the more I was able to share it with Michael. And by the way, it goes
Yes.
both ways, because like in year 4, we had to confront some shadow stuff. Like when we talk about shadow, we talk about that's when we're both off the pedestal,
Yeah.
ladies and gentlemen. It's like,
Yeah.
okay. And I had to confront my own willingness and ability and desire to love all of
Yes.
him
So tricky.
because of and we don't have to,
Yeah.
by the way. But if we love someone that much, it can be a little messy
Yeah.
there for a while. But boy, when we exhale from it and we can walk over that bridge together and we see the forest of the trees and we get to the other side, it's a much
Yeah.
richer, deeper and
Yeah.
trust.
I had that
Yeah.
experience in my marriage when my husband, Boyd, his father died unexpectedly, and that kind of took him to his knees and helped him to discover a whole new side of himself. And then it led to this whole career crisis, which is wonderful now because he's doing what he's meant to do and he has his own company and everything's fine. But in that period of time, I was so reflective about this fact that I kept wanting Boyd to be emotionally available. That was my big line when we were young, newly married and younger. Well, you need to be more open with me emotionally. And then to see his raw emotion and to really be confronted with a man's vulnerability. I was shocked at how scared that made me, how much I had bought into him being on a horse and going and slaying a dragon for me and taking care of me. I mean, the whole thing was so shocking. And thankfully, we had a wonderful therapist at that time who guided us through all that. But the amount of shame that I felt about my own things I had done to him, how to keep him in a little box. And even though I say I want the truth and I want a vulnerable man, it's like to really sit with the vulnerability in your partner. And then we can get into culture and men and women and all that we don't have time for. But, to really sit with a man's vulnerability and what that means, it's really humbling, and we're all guilty of it. Whether you do it to your partner,
Yes,
whether they're same-sex
yes.
partners or whatever, fill in the blank. But
Yeah.
it takes courage to do that. And to what you said, it really took a lot of trust for each of us to break down what we had projected onto the other person and decide that we got to rebuild this thing. We got to frame it up in a different way.
Yeah. I mean, look, parent-child love is just innately
Yeah.
unconditional, right? Most of the time.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that people don't have to set boundaries with their children and their parents sometimes when things are just not
Yeah.
healthy enough to be able to stay in a ring and that in the way that everybody really wants to deep down. But when it comes to love, romantic love, and friendship, there are
Yeah.
requirements, right? There's just requirements. But when you get to a level of you've gotten through most of like the non-negotiable requirements, and then it gets down to loving what is, as Byron
Yeah.
Katie would say, and loving someone that much that you actually, it does become
Yeah.
unconditional. I mean, again, I saw my folks, the 74-year marriage. I mean, they had tricky times
Hmm.
midway, right? Where I think for a minute there was a question,
Yeah.
or at least on one side. But boy, I mean, they started off a foundational, trusting their instincts. They happened to have been right. They trusted
Yeah.
their heart. They happened to have been right. But then they stayed in the ring. They stayed
Yeah.
in the room. And those last 25 years, they both passed at 94 and 97. They were thick as thieves. They had reached 100%
Yeah.
unconditional love. No question. And but here's the thing, back to your
Yeah.
original thing. Not everyone's going to have that
Yeah.
in this lifetime.
Yeah.
Not everyone's going to experience that. And the truth is, and by the way, even when we do, one person's going to pass before the other, and we still have to
Sure.
survive and hopefully still figure out a way to thrive. And that's when it comes back to connection to our own heart and our own self acknowledgement of the miracle that we really are, each
Yeah.
human, and the connection to the divine, which is not connected to a personality or a timeline or a structure or anyone that we might live under the same roof
Yeah.
with, right? It's to bring us to a place of still comfort and assurance and feeling more full, even though there's might be things that we still
Yes.
want on this earth plane. So at the end of the day, when we talk about love, that really is the inner, that's the source
Yeah.
of all of it. And it's where we begin and where we need to
Yeah.
end as we let go of so much
Do
along the
you
way.
feel at this point in your life you can say, I love myself with all that you've learned about love, with all that the love that has been reflected back to you, of the love that you've been able to receive? Can you say that?
I can say
Yeah.
that. And as a human, I just want to normalize the fact that the good news is, yes, I can say
Yeah.
that. I have had some sort of visceral experiences. It takes visceral
Yeah.
experience, by the way. Love just aren't
Yeah.
words, right? Love, like when you are in a loving relationship or friendship or with family or friends or intimate relationship, you are experiencing
Yes.
that love in every cell of your body. I will say that I don't think we can talk ourselves into loving
Yeah.
ourselves. I don't, however, I know that in my own life, I had to go deep to have the experience of visceral, palpable
Yeah.
love. Like I remember being in a meditation and a 4-day silent meditation retreat. I didn't see this coming, but it was, again, that period of time where I ended the marriage and I was in this zone where I had
Yeah.
space and I was very open. And oh boy, I went into a recognition of
Yeah.
self-compassion because I've lived my life compassionate for others. Not all the time with
Sure.
everyone,
Of
but a lot of the time. But oh my gosh, I was having a relationship with
Yeah.
myself and talking to myself and seeing what I went through and being like, oh honey, like I actually
Yeah.
felt it. And I came out of that going, and I'm tears. And I'm like, oh my God, I've never experienced that
Yeah.
before in that way. So I do feel like in order to get to a loving place with a real, like visceral loving place, we have to have some quiet
Yeah.
time to connect
Yeah.
we have to have ritual. We have to be able to want it and give that
Yeah.
time to ourselves to reach that inner
Yeah.
knowing and connectivity with the truth of our heart,
It's so true. And maybe we can end on that
Yeah.
because it feels practical to me that this big notion of self love can feel so enormous. It can feel enormous and it can also feel slippery. Like, what is it? It can feel like it gets too sentimental or too new age or, fill in the blank. And I think when you break it down to self-compassion, like you mentioned, and I've had experiences of self-acceptance, to me, those
Yes.
practices, they need time, they need space, they need stillness. It's very hard to accept your flaws and your mistakes and your humanity on the fly. You know, you make a mistake or you say
Yeah.
something or you hurt someone's feelings or you don't perform at your job or you can't connect with your spouse or you can't connect with your teenager, whatever it is. It's hard to just keep moving through your day and expect to recover from that. And I think what happens over time is there's
Yeah.
so many moments like that, you lose touch with yourself. So I'm like you, it's the
Yes.
pause. For me, it's the
Mhm.
pause and hand on the
Mhm.
heart and the
Mhm.
deep breath and saying,
Yeah.
what would my friend say right now? Or if you have a connection with the divine or God or nature, like being in the presence of that energy and saying, I'm still lovable, even with all this
Yes, right.
mistake, this flaw, this humiliating thing I did, I'm still lovable. So
Yes.
I think that's a wonderful way to invite the people listening that part of love is really moving at a slower pace to let love in, to be able to receive. It is a choice. And I
That's
think
right.
choices move
Yes.
much more intentionally and slowly than instinct. And I think we're taught growing up, oh, you'll have it. You're a princess. You'll be saved by the prince or the guy on the horse or whoever.
Yeah.
And so it's pitched to us as this instinct. It's natural. But the reality of it's a choice and it's a day to day practice.
That's right. It's a choice to pay attention to ourselves like we
Yeah.
are with everybody else. And I love the fact that you brought up hands on the heart and breath because literally yesterday I had a private session with a mom who was being really hard on
Yeah.
herself for losing her way with her daughter. And we literally talked about, and it wasn't like this was premeditated. It was off the cuff, but these are not things that haven't been talked about before, of course. But it was literally, like you
Yeah.
just said, it was first having a physical
Yes.
doing something physical with yourself. So it was hands on the
Yeah.
heart. And then it was feet on the floor, feel your
Yes. I
feet on the
love that.
floor, getting grounded. And then it was a breath, one breath, two breaths, three breaths into the belly and holding and releasing slowly on the out breath, twice as long, which calms the nervous system pretty much
Yeah.
immediately. And the last thing was a
Yeah.
word or saying that we express our love through
Yeah.
words so often with other people. How about back to ourselves? So hers was, who was it, taking a breath in, and it was like, chill,
Huh.
chill, but not from a place of
Right.
demand, but just an invitation. Mine, when I'm if in the middle of the night, if I have a disturbing
Mhm.
dream or something, I will say literally to myself, and I say to everyone, if you like this, it's yours too, or add to it, or edit it, or make it your own. I am loved. I am guided. I am protected. I am connected.
Mm.
I am loved. I am guided. And I'm asleep. I'm
Yeah.
asleep in like a minute. Right. So we all find our ways detouring from this
Yeah.
acknowledgement of the beauty of who we are and the full acceptance of our human experience, which is full of mistakes, as Michael Beckett would
Yes.
say, right? And then learning
Yeah.
from them and coming back in the fold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Marcy, thank you so much for sharing with us. I'm going to add all the ways that people can find you in these notes, in the episode
Okay.
notes. And I just encourage people to check out Marcy's work. And I so appreciate how generous you are with your lessons. And as I said in the beginning, I just feel like you embody love. When I hear the word love, when I think of leaders of
Mm.
love, you are a person who comes to mind. So I appreciate you. And I'm so grateful that our paths have crossed now in an even more significant way because I
Mm.
have two kids who drive.
Mm. Oh my gosh, I know, Paige. Really, thank you so much as well, honey. And remember that concept in staying in the zone of self-love that when we see something in another, it
Yeah.
reflects back the truth of who we are because we couldn't recognize it in another if we didn't have it within
Yeah.
our own consciousness and our own heart. So right back at you. Thank you for who you are and all that you bring to the world and everyone you touch. And I specifically have kept I'm tracking you too,
Yeah.
girl. I am tracking you too. And I mean, this was such a rich conversation. We could go on and on for a
Yeah.
day because there's so much here, but I love that you're talking about love and inviting me into the conversation and let it be and let
That's
it
right.
continue on and on and on, right?
Yes.
no end to this
That's right.
conversation or
That's
this
right.
experience in life.
I so appreciate you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
All right.
Same here.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.